Welcome to my podcast, Scientist Free from Religion. This podcast has as proposal, as main idea to talk about a scientific topic, but also talk about religion. Different from the common assumption in which science and religion should be separated, here on this podcast we recognize formally that science and religion are not disconnected. Sadly, religion can be a very big threat to science. So on this podcast, the proposal is to talk about it freely, so without fear, without the illusion that they are separate topics. So we are going to cover a possible topic. Most of them will be focused on the connection between religion and science, especially to defend science. That's our goal. Our goal here is to defend science from religion and to help to make science, to spread scientific thinking, especially to defend it against religion.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at one of the most fascinating figures in American public life, I think, Francis Collins.
Absolutely. I mean, you have this world-class geneticist, former head of the Human Genome Project, a titan of science.
Who is also a very outspoken and committed Christian.
Right. And for a lot of people, that just doesn't compute. It feels like what some call an epistemic collision. How do you square rigorous, evidence-based science with faith?
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're getting into his main argument for how science and faith can work together, and specifically, we're going to focus on his idea of a universal moral law.
Collins tries to solve this problem, by saying science explains the how and God explains the why.
So he's not trying to compartmentalize them. He wants to integrate them.
Exactly. And that integration, that bridge he tries to build is what makes him so politically useful in the United States.
Okay, what do you mean by that? Politically useful?
Well, the source material points out that most voters in the U.S. deeply distrust atheists, more than almost any other group. If Collins were just a secular technocrat, his influence would be tiny.
So his faith is a kind of political currency?
It is. He can speak the language of religion, which allows him to promote data-driven, policy-think mRNA vaccines without setting off the cultural alarm bells that a secular scientist might. He can reassure people.
But the sources also call this a Trojan horse. What was the danger there?
The danger is that when you're trying so hard to build that bridge, you might let some less than rigorous philosophical reasoning sneak in. You risk diluting the science with sentiment.
Okay, let's get into that risk of dilution, because this brings us straight to the main conflict he sets up, this idea of meaning versus materialism.
He argues pretty consistently that a purely material universe is insufficient, that it can't explain everything we experience.
And that's where we see him clash with people like Richard Dawkins,
Yeah.
right? Especially on this idea of beauty.
Yes, that's a perfect example. Collins argued that beauty can't just be dismissed as, and I'm quoting here, evolutionary epiphenomenal froth on the surface of an uncaring universe.
He's saying our experience of awe, of transcendence when we see a sunset or hear music, feels like it means more than just random neural firing.
And Dawkins, in classic Dawkins fashion, basically said that's just emotive language.
Right. He argues it's all perfectly explicable by science. Survival advantages, cognitive byproducts, that sort of thing.
But you see what Collins is doing there? He's framing the whole debate. It's either a cold, meaningless materialism or a supernatural worldview that offers coherence and value.
A very clever setup for his main argument, the one about a universal moral law.
It is. And when he talks about this universal moral law written on the human heart, what the sources point out is that this isn't a scientific hypothesis.
What is it, though?
It's classic Christian natural law theology. It's C.S. Lewis. It's Augustine. It's just dressed up in the language of science.
So he's not using science to discover a moral law. He's starting with a theological idea of a moral law and then looking for things that fit.
Precisely. That is the absolute key. It's the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning.
Science is inductive, right? You gather data and build up to a theory.
Exactly. You start with observation. Collins's argument here is purely deductive. He starts with a premise he already believes is true and reasons downward from there.
Okay, so walk us through the deductive steps that the sources lay out.
Sure. Step 1. Humans everywhere seem to share some basic moral intuitions, a sense of right and wrong.
The golden rule, that kind of thing.
Right. Step 2. These intuitions, especially the ones that seem to go against our own self-interest, like radical self-sacrifice, must come from a source beyond evolution, a transcendent source.
And step 3 is that the best candidate for that source is
God. And then step 4, the final leap. The God we're talking about happens to look an awful lot like the Christian God.
The conclusion was baked in from the start.
The conclusion was the start. And you see it in the examples he chooses. The source material is very clear on this.
What kind of examples?
Things like unconditional forgiveness, altruism toward your enemies, the sanctity of life, these are consistently presented as universals.
But the critique is that they aren't really anthropological universals, are they?
Not really. Many are powerful, profound virtues, but they are very much products of Christian moral formation, exported globally through centuries of missionary work. They aren't just things we find in every ancient culture.
So he's finding evidence of Christian morality and calling it evidence of a universal law.
That's the argument, which sets up this really stark contrast with someone like Sam Harris.
Right. Harris comes at morality from the complete opposite direction in the moral landscape.
A completely inductive approach. Harris basically throws out the need for a supernatural ought and says, look, morality is just a scientific optimization problem.
An optimization problem? What does that even mean?
It means the goal of morality is to maximize human well-being. And science is the tool we use to figure out how to do that. It's an empirical question.
So it's less like a law you have to follow and more like an engineering problem you have to solve.
That's a great way to put it. Harris uses this analogy of a fitness landscape, like in math. There are peaks of well-being and flourishing and valleys of misery and suffering.
And science is the map that helps us find the peaks.
Exactly. You assign your resources, policy, money, time to maximize an objective function, which is human well-being, all while working within the real-world constraints of biology and society.
So Harris is trying to build a moral system from scientific observation.
While Collins is essentially providing scientific clothes for a moral system he already has, one that comes from his faith.
Okay, this brings us to the final and maybe most critical part of the analysis, the actual data.
Right. Because if Collins's claim is true, that Christianity reveals a universal moral law, then you'd expect Christians to be, well, measurably more altruistic. It's a testable hypothesis.
And has it been tested?
It has. The sources cite a huge study, over 1,000 children across different countries looking at actual altruistic behavior.
Not just what they say, but what they actually do.
Yes, real behavioral tasks, like sharing resources with anonymous strangers. And the conclusion was pretty damning for the theory.
What did it find?
It found that being Christian did not make a person more altruistic towards strangers.
Really? No correlation?
Nope. What mattered more was their country of origin and the specific cultural norms where they grew up.
That is a direct empirical challenge to his entire premise.
And it gets even more pointed. The study found that kids from fundamentalist backgrounds, the ones you'd think would be most aligned with this so-called universal law,
They weren't more altruistic.
they were often less so than secular children. Moderate Christians were statistically about the same as their secular peers.
Wow. So the science hasn't supported the idea of a uniquely powerful Christian moral system. The sources say it has actively undermined it.
Repeatedly. Which leads the sources to their final conclusion. That Collins's project is less about scientific inquiry and more a form of scientific evangelism.
So in the end, you see Collins as this symptom of a larger cultural issue in America.
I think that's what the analysis suggests. He's this necessary hybrid, fluent in both data and doctrine, because the public sphere, as one source puts it, often elects faith before facts.
He's the translator, the person who makes science safe for a huge part of the country that might otherwise reject it outright.
And that has real value, for public health, for scientific funding. He calms the waters between the America that trusts evidence and the America that worships a personal God.
But the deep dive leaves us with this really uncomfortable question. Does that bridge he represents strengthen the connection between those two Americas?
Or does it weaken the very foundation of science by demanding a compromise on its philosophical rigor?
That really is the core tension. And it's something for you to think about. We've seen the political need for someone like Collins. We've seen the deductive, theological nature of his moral argument. And we've seen the empirical data that challenges it.
So the question to mull over is this. To what extent does the need to gain public trust in science justify compromising scientific or philosophical integrity? Where do you draw that line between necessary translation and intellectual surrender? That's the challenge Collins' career really puts in front of all of us.
Hey there! You arrived to the end of this episode. You can always check out my YouTube channel, and also keep watching, because there are 7 episodes. So you just if you enjoy this one, hopefully you are going to enjoy the next one. I always like to remember that you can support my work by buying my books. Even though I still don't have a book about religion, which is the main topic of the podcast, I do have a book about artificial intelligence, and also I have a blog called Scientists Free from Religion on Medium, and there are several blog posts there, and you can enjoy it, you can read it, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can share it with your friends. So hopefully I can hear from you, and hope you had an amazing time. So hope to see you in the next episode.